Today,
The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett.
everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants that eternal kiss. Yeah, everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one life in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing Om
On the Expansion Zone, we examine life and our quest to understand who and what we are and of the vastness of human potentials. We explore the making of our world from quantum physics to parapsychology, health, sociology, and philosophy, along with practical living. You are reminded of the possibilities in creating personal change. So for an hour, we'll stimulate and expand the mind.
Om Shanti, 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 Shanti. Sing the world. Let's do it together. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. It's time to wake up. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Well, welcome once again to the Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett. I am, of course, Sonia Barrett, your host. And, of course, thanks to Donna Delore for our intro song, Be the Change. And, well, happy Monday to you. And it's certainly I'm going to say, a beautiful day here in Los Angeles. The weather is just perfect today. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's just great. And for me, any weather that requires a sweater, yes, I'm one of those people. I complain that it's too cold. You know, what do you expect? You know, I was actually born in Jamaica. It's still in my blood after all these years. Warm weather is still there. So, well, I thought today, in light of these political momentum, you know, we don't get into politics on the show really because there's enough shows that talk about it. However, I wanted to, my guest today anyway, we're going to explore a little bit about, I would say, political language to some degree, interpretation, and the governing of words in general. And I think that's so very important. I think it's very enlightening to really realize the different kinds of changes that are made to language, particularly in terms of the political arena, because often I'm wondering, well, you know, why did they change it to this word when it was so simple with the other word? And, you know, a person, it keeps you on your toes if you're planning to pay attention. But there's a lot of that. And I think, you know, as always, human beings, we tend to adapt to some degree in everything. We tend to adapt. But also things slip by us as well because things get normalized. And so we don't even notice when, you know, there's a lot of sleight of hand tricks that go on. So we're not going to, you know, get real crazy with it. Now, the last time my guest was here, he was quoting something actually and used the N-word. And of course, yes, I was quickly reprimanded that he can't say that. And so it was a quote. So anyway, we are going to talk about that a little bit in terms of you know, why and so on. And also this is my 2 cents I'm throwing in. I really like to remind people that no matter what is going on in terms of politics and in terms of whether your party wins or not win or things don't go necessarily as planned in your mind or as you had hoped, I think we have to remember that we must establish our personal way out. We must establish our own personal system, because at the end of the day, you can't really count on, anybody else, the system per se, to provide the kind of cushion that you might think that you deserve. And I think that's so important that we realize at the end of the day we are individuals, and that we must establish our own footing and foundation. And yes, I'm gonna do a quote from Mike Tyson, because I love this quote so much. He says, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." And I love that. I love that quote because it's so true. We've all been punched in the face by life at some point in time. So I'm saying, what are your alternative plans if things don't seem to go as planned tomorrow or next year or whatever, in terms of the leaders or those who call themselves leaders? What's your personal strategy that you're putting in place for yourself? And that's really important. How do you dodge the punch? And if you do get punched in the face, what do you do after? How do you get up from that? And I think that must always be at the forefront of our mind. So that's my 2 cents I'm throwing in on that. So today my guest is going to be Professor Ezra Aharone, and I've interviewed him before when I was co-hosting on InnerVision, and I've interviewed him other times in the past, and I really love what he has to say. I love his dialogue. I love the way that he writes. I think that's so very important. So we're also going to be talking about his involvement with Delaware State University, who recently signed an accord to become a strategic partner to the African Peer Review Mechanism, that's APRM, to academically assist in 21st century African development. So a bit about Professor Ezra Aharone. Ezra Aharone was born in Newark and raised in New Jersey. He earned a BS in Business Management from Hampton University in 1980. He has lived and worked in West Africa, where his relationships span from presidents and government officials to everyday people in remote villages. His originality of thought, coupled with his international experience, provides a unique scope of reference that gives his books uncommon distinction. Aharone is an adjunct associate professor of political science at Delaware State University. He is also a political and business consultant on African affairs, as well as the author of Sovereign Evolution and Pond Sovereignty. So I'm going to say welcome to the show, Ezra Aharone. Good to have you back.
Good afternoon, and hello to all the listening audience.
All right. Well, I'm going to read a quote from an article you wrote called "The Unabolishable N-Word," and I think this quote goes across the board for, I think, just everything in terms of our lives, in terms of history, in terms of so much. And the quote is, "Whoever wields sovereign powers over a territory also has subsequent access to regulate words and concepts, as well as make or reshape history, doctrines, and ideologies. Man has probably warred over words and ideals, such as just as much as territory and resources." So I think that's really important. So I thank you for that article as well. It's got a lot of rich content in there. Now you remember the last time you were here, and you did a quote, and you used that word, and we had promised to have you back so that we could talk about that a little bit. I don't know if you want to start there, or if you want us to kind of dive into another area.
Well, I respect the decorum of every environment that I'm in, so I apologize then, and I want all of your station high uppers and everybody that's affiliated with the station. I'm not a bad guy. by making that quote. Had I have known, I would have euphemistically used the more acceptable terms. But yeah, I wrote that article some time ago on the unabolishable N-word. And I can't remember the exact circumstances, but the word had resurfaced in a very public way related to some quotes that other people had made and to refer to black people, and I felt that it was necessary to make it clear that that word is not just a word. That word is a psychology. That word represents conditions, and that psychology and those conditions are just as much alive and even more dangerous than the word itself. However, people tend to focus on the word as though the word in and of itself is the problem, when I argued in the article that the unaddressed effects and impact that have accrued over the centuries, that people tend to stray away from, those things are the problem. Those conditions are the problem. So as long as those conditions exist, you'll find that that word would exist. And I think as long as there's an America, that word would exist. For instance, there are some places in the world where maybe people in a 24-hour period of time never use the term. But that's because there's no use, no need to it, because those conditions aren't there or those influences aren't there. So if we want to not say that word, or we want to abolish that word, then we have to look at abolishing those conditions, abolishing those influences.
So now, I don't know if, I think it would be great just for a moment, if you don't mind, if we could just talk a little bit about the psychology behind it. I think I would like for you to do that, if you don't mind. I think that, from what I'm reading here, I think it's important. I know it's been addressed in many different forums, but I think that your unique approach and the language you use, I think really it conveys perhaps another angle as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, words are powerful because words are not just definitions. Certain words are concepts, and certain words within those concepts, they convey ideals that govern the way people think and behave. And it also can be that those concepts are embraced at the material and human expense of others, so that, a word may seemingly denigrate one group, but at the same time, that word empowers another. And I think you can go from culture to culture, nation to nation, and you'll find that, there are code words within the language and within the cultures that have the same type of impact as that the N-word has here. So if you want to defang a terminology, then it's incumbent that there's some type of accompanying intellect and institutions that exist that are strong enough to counter those influences. And unfortunately, within this society, no such institutions really exist. So we have a concept that has been virtually left unchecked and unfettered, and then people think the solution is to, simply not say it. And that's why I said that, with this psychology, there has to be a countervailing type of psychology that I would argue has to be grounded in a new type of intellectual and institutional approach to how, whatever group that is, whether it's Africans here or whatever country, whatever culture, to create these intellectual institutional means by which the countervailing influences are able to be far more impactful than the word, and those things are able to address the conditions.
So would you say the history, would you say, I mean, I think it seems like because most people perhaps don't know the history behind, maybe not necessarily this word, but the history behind any particular, word or terminology. There's always this root meaning that over time becomes lost or watered down and becomes something else, yet it has a root meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the psychology of words themselves, and there's a segment in one of the books that I've written. I talk about the importance of language and how you would find world leaders will come to the United Nations and they'll make speeches and they'll visit different places in the U.S. And even though they may speak English fluently, they'll never utter an English word in public on American soil. Why? Because it is in their interest in promoting the ways of their culture that they want their language to be placed on the world stage. And so words in that context are very powerful. So, what concepts, what words now are we instilling in our youth? And how are those words in rather negative or positive ways, in creative ways or constructive ways, having impact within culture? And I think that the power of these concepts are oftentimes overlooked because people feel more comfortable playing and being within the mainstream margins of what's acceptable. It spills over into all things, comedy as well. Who's funny, who's not funny, what comedian can make millions of dollars telling virtually unfunny jokes on late night TV that, grooms an audience, to laugh on cue when they read jokes off of cue cards, and, you have the Harvard Lampoon, and people come through this culture of comedy through places like Harvard where humor is controlled and directed, and, who's inside of that? Who directs, the tentacles of that comedy, that filters into society that, says what's funny. And then you have black comics, they are involved in another type of comedy that perhaps doesn't have the same intellectual premium that other groups may have, that, like I would say, that filter through the Harvard Lampoon circuit. So you'll find words and concepts, these things, they exist on all of these levels, and I would argue that underneath all of those things are the groundwork or a level of racism that also goes unchecked.
Okay, well, this is why I'm bringing it up, so that for everything that you just said and everything that I said earlier is because I often notice the change in language, particularly when it comes to politics. And everything you said, of course, connects with the political arena simply because, we are being, how we should think or even, as you said, what we should find funny is directed. There's so much that is directed that we don't realize is being directed in terms of how we're going to think and how we're going to language and so on. Mm-hmm. But it leaves people, the people who are particularly vulnerable, maybe the people who are not quite what we would call so educated, or the more impoverished groups. When you're changing political language as much as they do, it completely, from where I'm looking at it, confuses people. And I think after a while, they don't even know what it is that they believe or what they're voting for. And that's what I was also looking at.
and again, it's institutions are really the lifeblood of cultures. And when you lack strong institutions that can be instrumental in shaping concepts and, filtering words that influence the way people think, it's critically important. It's even like the term people of color that just popped up, and I find just through my own observation that it's mostly black people who use that term, people of color. I'm waiting for the meeting. Where do people of color gather? Where is the literature of this? Where can I read about this academically? This people of color, because in a lot of instances, I would say that black people will publicly use the term because it gives what appears to be a greater legitimacy to a black-related issue. For example, the other day, the media woman, Megyn Kelly, made the comment about blackface, that it's okay when she was growing up, and if you could do it for Halloween and so forth. And then she lost her job, as that comment was part of a series of other comments that she had made regarding race that did not go over too well. And so Al Roker made the comment that, she owes an apology to all people of color. And I was listening, I said, and I had to blink my eyes a few times as I'm watching it. Blackface is an offense to black people. And that's where it traces to, not people of color. And it may sound like, I'm splitting hairs, or, well, what difference does it make? I think it makes a lot of difference. Because if your particular interest as a group, regardless of what group that may be, if you need others to align themselves with you or to contribute into your interests in a way that validates your interests as opposed to it standing alone, then I think that's very problematic. And, we've seen it all throughout history in a way that possibly unnoticed or maybe deliberately not addressed, because it's always better if a black interest is associated within a larger context of a problem as opposed to, identifying what it really is. And so, again, the intellectual, institutional pillars that groups create, those are the best types of defenses to guard against infiltrations in a society when those harmful types of influences exist.
And yes, I absolutely agree. And when you mentioned about the term people of color coming up from out of nowhere, it immediately takes me back to my questioning so many times when I hear a term, or I might find myself using a term. I have no idea when it got into my brain, and then I'm suddenly aware of where did this come from? Where did it begin? You never notice where things come from. They just show up, and we just all sort of automatically get on this train, this treadmill of language.
Mm-hmm. It's like Tea Party. The first time I heard Tea Party, I was like, Tea Party. And the on the news, it was just said just like a matter of fact. And I was like, wow, I must have missed something. Tea Party? What's Tea Party? And just as soon as Tea Party, as rapidly as it came into language, it phased right out. Now today, you don't hear the term Tea Party.
Yes, this is the thing. This is exactly what I'm talking about. When I first heard the term too, I didn't know what it, I'm like, what is this? Are we talking about the Mad Hatter? And we're talking about Alice in Wonderland? What are we talking about? And so, so these words, these terms just come and then they just go away. But the control process I find to be fascinating, how this pendulum just sort of swings and things just move, and we move with this wind without realizing that we are moving, something is moving us.
Mm-hmm. And that's why even within hip hop itself and the way the words are constructed, it's very important. I was talking to some students just recently, within a week ago, and I was teasing them about me being a rapper, that I was thinking about dropping some hits, right? And the first thing one of them said to me was, "Yeah, you'd be okay, because you think deep enough." He said, "But I don't think you know the lingo. I don't think you know the lingo." And yeah, because the way the language is constructed within, hip hop, it's a whole nother way of communicating, and as Black people, we've always had that type of language, how would you call it, an esoteric way of language that has been with us, so each generation, develops it in a way that, the older generations, if you don't know what they're talking about, you won't even get the message, And I know when I was growing up, we had ways of speaking that, our parents didn't understand, And the point that I'm making is that, that skill set and that means by which words can be conveyed, is very important. And, it could be the very thing that influences and take the thinking of people to the level where the right types of actions are made to, as I said earlier, countervail the existing influences.
Yes. Well, I tell you, I'm sure there are people out there listening who are thinking, yes, I was thinking along those lines. I've been thinking about it, but at the same time, there's so much that we don't always talk about. We're thinking about it quietly to ourselves, and then we just sort of go along for the ride, because that's what the norm is. But in our minds, we question, even if it's for a brief moment, we question it. Mm-hmm. And, and this is what the expansion zone is about. It's everything. It's just diving into everything so that we can see what shapes us. Who's shaping us? And I think that's a biggie right there. So, were you going to add something?
I was going to say, even with my work that centers on the concept and consciousness of sovereignty, people in immediate wavelength, a lot of people don't understand it. So, well, what is that about? But beyond the ideals of self-government, sovereignty deals with the way people think and understand and act and do things that promote their best interests. So by a person engaged in those types of actions, even if it's controlling of words, then by definition, even if not by intent, they are engaged in sovereign behaviors. And so that's important to understand, because I say more than the act of self-government or the politics of the word, sovereignty is a consciousness, and it relates to the highest level of consciousness that people can begin to apply to bring about the types of solution-oriented and developmental things within a society that are necessary for, people to exist in this 21st century world.
And you are absolutely so right with that, because even if you feel that you can't do anything per se, you can't go and specifically change a law, it still begins with you, with what you're saying, your languaging, understanding what it is that you're actually saying. And it can actually impact the choices that we make simply because we better understand the language. So I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it determines to a great extent, how people interact with each other and where their real interests intersect. Because people oftentimes may think that my work somehow is a competing ideal with the mainstream ways in which people go about their everyday life or their political life. But I use the term expansion, and not knowing that would be the name of your show, but I use the concept as a means by which I argue expands the experience of African people in America, and it expands the experience of African people in general. When you talk about the sovereign ideals, it's not a competitive way of looking at the experience of African people. It's really an expansion of the experience, because one is not accomplished at the expense of the other.
And, the thing, too, is that the word sovereignty has sort of, in a way, been sort of in a way, a negative that's been added to it. And it's not a word that many people are familiar with. Sure, they've heard the word, but it's almost as if people sort of stay away from that word because they don't really understand what it means and how this applies to them. So it's this word that sort of sits, over here on the side and probably belongs to the king or something like that. So there is this manner in which the word is sort of set aside. So I'm glad that you were explaining that as well.
Yeah, because even now in America, I think in the last 10 years, that word has been used publicly by officials probably more than any other time. Because when I first started academically exploring the concept and wrote my first book in 2003, the word was virtually non-existent in public life in America. But then what happened was that after the war in Iraq, people began to use the term sovereignty because it was a claim that the sovereign rights of the Iraqi people had been violated. So I think it was 2004 that sovereignty was, according to Webster's, the seventh or eighth most searched word of the year. But people were searching it in conjunction with words like insurgency because they thought that it had a connection with being an insurgent and something related to like Middle Eastern politics. But then, as I said, as you see now in the evolution of it, it's a word that people commonly use in different contexts, but nonetheless, people are now utilizing the word.
And I think it's, I hope that more people begin to really pay attention to it and see how it actually is significant to their lives and to them doing their own personal investigation, just even of just your own life in terms of how sovereign you are in your language, if in no other way in your language, in what you're actually saying. So, super, super important, especially at this time. Let me just give the station ID, let everybody know. If you just tuned in, of course, you know you are on KPFK 90.7 FM in Southern California, 98.7 in Santa Barbara, 93.7 in San Diego, 99.5 in Ridgecrest and China Lake, and streaming live at kpfk.org. And you are listening to The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett, and that is me, Sonia, and my guest is Ezra Aharone. He is a professor at Delaware State University, and we are having a conversation. We happen to be talking about language right now, but he's also the author of the books Sovereign Evolution and Pond Sovereignty. Now, let's talk about your project. Let's get into that some, because everything that we've been saying here today, I really feel is significant to people, to Black people understanding, yes, even more so what it is that you're aiming to do. Because there's a level of sovereignty that is necessary in terms of language, in terms of communication, in terms of all of that. So if you would tell us about that.
Oh, well, I believe in applications, I believe in institutions, and I believe that the intellect of any group has to be a part of something that supports and sustains economies. And those economies, in turn, are the lifeblood that filter in to support that intellect. So there's always this relationship between the way people think in conjunction with the means by which they are able to make themselves relevant in the world in a very independent sense. And so I've lived and worked in West Africa most of my adult life, and I've always seen the importance of having these, of recognizing the interlocking interests. And so one of the things that I've done as a professor was to create these links between Africa and African American institutions. And so in this latest work at Delaware State University, we've entered into a partnership with the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is an agency of the AU that engages in conducting review reports of nations to examine the governance, the socio-political environment, the economics of nations, and then in turn produce reports that provide recommendations as to what nations can commonly do to advance themselves, what certain nations are doing individually that other nations could perhaps replicate, and to, of course, implement things that are going to create the most impactful forms of development in nations. So APRM is really one of the great institutions of Africa that's on the forefront of creating changes that are necessary for 21st century development. And at Delaware State, we have partnered to academically assist in the performing of these review reports. And we're doing this as well. We have other HBCUs that we are now engaging with that will join the model to further the way that these reports can be conducted on an even more thorough level. And we have as well other great development partners with us in the model. Also, a part of the partnership is a company called Cool Baker Global, which is a partnership between Robert Cool Bell of Cool and the Gang and Dusty Baker, former baseball player and baseball manager, who has a renewable energy company called Baker Energy. And so Cool and Dusty formed a partnership because Cool has a very extensive background in being involved in African affairs. And he travels throughout Africa yearly, and he's been involved in so many ventures and humanitarian things. And he's just a great brother who does a lot of unrecognized things on the continent. And so together, those of us with these common aspirations are working together to involve what the AU, the African Union, calls the sixth region, involve ourselves in African affairs. The sixth region, Africa has 5 regions: Northeast, Southwest, and Central. The sixth region, as the African Union defines it, is comprised of diaspora Africans. Africans, regardless of where you live, those of us who live outside of Africa. So we comprise what the African Union recognizes as the sixth region. And so with Baker Global, with Delaware State University, and other partners, be it HBCUs and businesses that we'll bring into the model, this is a way of, as six regions participants, that we are engaged in real relevant development projects that will gain traction. So that's the background of that partnership, and so far we're doing a lot of groundwork for partnerships on a lot of great levels. So we're looking forward to, and we'll keep you informed over the next month with the different success stories that we're putting together.
Now this change that you're looking at for the 21st century change for Africa, what does that look like in terms of, if you were to envision, I mean, in your own imagination, and of course in those of the group, if you were to give us more of a glimpse as to what that could look like? I mean, such things as, I don't know, school or whatever that is, just to have a better idea of what that could look like.
Well, Africa is a place where each nation has their own cultural and traditional values. And because of the colonial past of Africa, a lot of those traditional things have been uprooted or they've been stagnated, but they're nonetheless values that, people hold dear. So how do you preserve a lot of those values and at the same time move African nations into the 21st century in terms of technology, in terms of industrialization, in terms of being able to have societies that function on high levels? How do you make these nations perform in that 21st century way? Well, we could look at a lot of Arab nations who hold on to traditional ways of their cultures, yet they have thriving, enterprising nations that, you would not look at as being underdeveloped. The same thing with the state of Israel. They hold on to ancient ways of culture and so forth, but yet, they produce some of the best scientists in the world, and they have agricultural technologies and cyber security things that, put them at the forefront of these types of technologies. And so what does 21st century progress look for Africa? First of all, it's preserving the best of the cultural ideals of people. At the same time, it's like with Baker Global, a renewable energy company, bringing energy to remote places that otherwise would not have power. Therefore, children could not study at night. People don't have electricity for fans or air conditioners. Even though people have telephones and they can connect to internet connections on their cell phones, bringing computers into libraries, building libraries. All of these things that here we may perhaps take for granted, but when you have consistent sources of power, it changes the dynamics of everything in terms of how people are able to live. So by working with step-by-step measures, those types of 21st century forms of development are right in reach. And those are the things that we're working on. an African peer review mechanism is premier in terms of identifying needs and identifying deficiencies that, people, those of us in the sixth region, have the resources to address, and not only address, but in mutually beneficial ways. So that's the beauty of this academic, economic, governmental model that we've created.
Now, if someone out there is listening and wanted to get involved in some way or another, how would they connect with you, or whoever they need to connect with?
Okay, yeah, great. In fact, my office, they can email my office, info at EzraSpeaks.com, EZRAH Speaks, SPEAKS, EzraSpeaks.com, and someone will get back to you. You can write, express your interest, and, we can see if there's some type of way of working together, because institutionally, those of us who are involved, we're always looking for ways and means of, again, the name of your show, expanding the model, because the needs of Africa are vast, and the level of experts that we need to address those issues in common approaches with Africa, there's always a great need to do that. So, we welcome the conversation.
Now, my question for you is this. In terms of school here and history, how should I state this? I wonder, from your perspective, history, the way it's taught in school, we all know has always been, I want to say not necessarily correct, but filtered history, and a lot of constructed history to fit a particular model. Now, do you see that it has gotten any worse or more extreme? Are kids getting even less information of this kind of necessary history, and potentially what impact it might be having now on our youths moving forward in life and potentially into college?
I think there's a disconnect between what young people typically are learning, not just in the household, but through the school system and within public spheres as well. Even though the perception is, the internet is available, all you got to do is read this, and you'll know all about Marcus Garvey, or you'll know all about Du Bois, or you'll know all about the Civil Rights Movement. And, a lot of what is promoted are things that fit within the narrative of how great America is and how bad a guy like Trump has become, almost out of nowhere. And so, narratives are linear in that way. So the real intricacies of the black experience that I would argue people need to really understand, those are things that I think are so commonly, overlooked, because guns, the issue with guns, the issue of racism, the issues of equality, whether it's for women or whomever, black people, those are three problems that incubate with the founding fathers of this nation. Yet, there is this means of viewing those issues as though they are contemporary problems that need a contemporary type of solution. But I would argue that the fact that they not only incubated during the period of time of the founding fathers, but they have been accompanied for centuries with the psychology, tells you that it's not that simplistic. And that's why issues of race, issues of inequality, issues related to guns, or a ridiculous comment or ridiculous term, gun control. There's no such thing. There would be a thing as gun control, because guns have always been out of control. So, by approaching those problems in this contemporary way, is a ridiculous way of looking at the crux of what this country faces. And so I say that to say, when we talk about the history that people are learning, it's not only just black people and black history, but it's just the historical character of America in general is being overlooked, which is why problems of race, problems of inequality, and problems related to firearms are so widespread and growing.
Absolutely, because you're so right on that. Because the fact is, this is affecting everybody. This history, this distortion in history, and this continuous changeover of a person's mind into a particular model of thinking. I think that that's where the root of the problem is, because neither black, white, pink, or green really knows the history, the true history. It's just so much distortion that it divides us, it puts us against each other. Now, when we spoke a while back, a few weeks ago, you made a comment that, and I thought it was really important, that just because everybody has this common language of not liking Trump doesn't mean that, I should say some people, many people then, have that common language of not liking Trump, doesn't mean that everybody's on the same page just because you share that common concepts or that common feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's like everybody who's anti-Trump automatically of this special interest group. And as though Trump somehow is the origin of this problem that sprang out of the last, 2 or 3 years. When I would argue it's the unaddressed psychology that's rooted in the contradictions of the founders that go uncritiqued. That's the problem. That's the problem. Because you can't have it both ways. Once the founders allowed slavery to coexist side by side with what they defined as a democracy, and people still say democracy began with the founders. Once you have that psychology in your mind, then it's a jump ball for whatever else happens with that psychology in terms of race relations. And by not addressing that, it makes it corrupts even more the character of the nation. And then when you try to, focus on a person like Trump, and I'm not giving him a key to an escape hatch by no means. I'm saying that without the psychology and duplicities of Jefferson, you automatically have to expect a Donald Trump. There's no other logical conclusion that one would arrive at. And so in many ways, to not expect a Trump means that a Jefferson's influence is not as widespread as we give him credit for in terms of the good things that he's attributed, that his work is attributed to. So one can't exist without the other, because they represent the origin of this thinking. regardless of what else they did in terms of the greatness of the nation and this amendment, that amendment, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration, fine. But that is accompanied with these other tentacles that have produced these unaddressed issues related to guns, race, and inequality.
They go hand in hand. They're partnered. Basically, was what you're saying. They've been partnered from the very beginning.
Oh yes, well, they go hand in hand. You cannot get one without the other.
Of course,
and that's the paradox. That's the paradox of the character of Americanization.
Well, we have about a minute.
Okay. Well, go ahead. I was going to say, oftentimes, though, it's because it's overlooked that, when people say, oh, we need to have a conversation about race, they need to be saying, we need to have a conversation about the founders of this nation and the corroded way of psychologies that were implanted within people as a consequence that have led to racism that we know today.
Absolutely. It began there, and that's something that doesn't get talked about. It's skipped over and jumped right to now, but not looking at the origins. Well, I want to thank you so much. And just real quickly, what's the website again?
My website is www.ezraspeaks.com. That's EZRAHSPEAKS, EzraSpeaks.com. And for those who want to write, they can write at info@EzraSpeaks.com.
Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing those enlightening words, enlightening language. Thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you.
And thanks to my listening audience and, of course, our engineer, D'Angelo Jones. Thank you so much. Visit theexpansionzone.com and check out the archive to hear a replay of the show, and also my website, therealsoniabarrett.com, and all my social media, Twitter, Facebook, so on. And as always, remember to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.
Everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one life in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing all